All right, looks like folks are starting to come in, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So welcome everyone to the pandemic's effect on university research with special guests from IRIS. We'll get started in just a minute, but first of all, I'm Erin from Steppingblocks, and I'm here to make sure everyone in the audience who wants to participate has a chance to. We do want to make this room fully interactive, so feel free to raise your hand at any time and we'll bring you up to the stage to share your stories or ask questions to IRIS or Steppingblocks. So if you're just now joining, feel free to raise your hand at any time. We'll bring you up to the stage to participate in the conversation. Or if you prefer, you can use the Q&A pane to ask questions, say hey to your friends, and whatever suits you. And if you're able to stay until the end, we will give you the option to opt in to a complimentary career outcomes report for your institution. So make sure you can if you're able. We are recording and live streaming the conversation, so stay tuned for a copy later this week. Rob Ganaway is the co-founder of Steppingblocks and works very closely with our friends at the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science, aka IRIS. So Rob, I will pass the baton to you.
All right, thanks Erin, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thanks for the introduction. Steppingblocks is a workforce analytics and education analytics provider, primarily to research universities across the country, but also research institutes like IRIS here with us today. Today, we're mainly focusing on the pandemic's effect on research funding, but more critically, how necessary it is to have outcome data to measure that impact and also find potential solutions as well. I'm joined today by Kevin Bjorn, who's the technical director at IRIS, and also Matt Van Esseltine, who's part of the research faculty and a sociologist at the University of Michigan. So thanks for joining us today, and without further ado, I'll pass it off to Kevin.
Thanks, Rob. So as Rob said, my name is Kevin Bjorn. I'm the technical director here at IRIS. As he said, IRIS stands for the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science. And what I'm going to do is walk you through a few slides that are a primer on what IRIS is, what we do. And then I'll jump into some analysis that we've conducted regarding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the research enterprise across the country, utilizing data that we collect from IRIS member universities. After that sort of high-level discussion about it, we're going to jump into a more in-depth analysis that was conducted by Dr. Van Esseltine at the University of Michigan, and he'll touch on some specific points, and then we'll talk a little bit after that about ways that IRIS has been working with federal officers, congressional staffers, things like that, to try to advocate for additional funding for things like the RISE Act and stimulus for research universities. And then we're going to finish up with a discussion, excuse me, regarding the relationship that IRIS has with Steppingblocks and how that has directly informed our ability to talk about outcomes of research-trained employees that work on all of our campuses. So I'm going to start out by sharing my screen here, and hopefully everyone can see the slides. And at any time, please feel free to interrupt us. There's nothing I like more than an interactive discussion with audience members. So we're here to answer questions, address any concerns or ideas that you have. So please feel free to be as interactive as you want to be. So what is IRIS? IRIS is officially an IRB-approved data repository that was founded at the University of Michigan. The core mission of IRIS is to help universities, and particularly member universities that participate with us, to understand and explain the value of the scientific research that we conduct every day on America's campuses. IRIS is made up of a consortium of member universities from across the country that contribute data, resources to support the infrastructure of IRIS, and also directly participate in the governance and decision-making that takes place here. So we're very university centric, university driven, and we are here to try to make as big an impact as possible regarding the understanding of the scientific research that takes place here in the United States. So some quick little factoids about IRIS. Right now we have about 35 university members, with more joining all the time. It represents roughly 40% of all the federal R&D spending that takes place in the country. These member universities account for roughly 30% of all the doctorates granted every year. And to date, roughly 240 researchers from across the country, so these would be faculty, these would be grad students, postdocs, et cetera, have utilized or are currently utilizing IRIS data through something we call the virtual data interface that we build, or the virtual data environment, to answer interesting and challenging questions, research questions that can utilize IRIS data in a variety of different ways. As you can see here in this slide, we work with a variety of different data sources. So universities are our core constituency, and that's where the core of our data comes from. We also work directly with the US Census Bureau, Bureau Van Dyke, which is a subsidiary of Moody's, and they provide business data to IRIS. Steppingblocks, of course, provides outcomes data and people-centric data. And then we pull in data from a variety of other sources. So public federal sources like the NIH, NSF, and other private sector sources as well. So this little graphic here on the right-hand side sort of explains how IRIS works. Basically, there are member institutions that share data with us, and in return, we share metrics and reports and tools that they can use on their campus for a variety of, in a variety of ways, as well as use it for communications, government relations, economic outreach, things like that. We take that data, we combine it with the other data sets from the sources that I've mentioned, and that's how we derive a lot of our value for our members. And then we take that data, we de-identify it, so we strip out identifying data points, and we make that data available to researchers, both through the IRIS Enclave, the IRIS virtual desktop environment, as well as through the federal research data centers that are maintained by the US Census Bureau. So a little bit about how it works and how we measure the effectiveness or the impact of science. This is just a little example right here. So imagine that you or your university receives an award funded by the National Science Foundation. You receive that award. You are expected to do a certain type of research using that money. To accomplish that, you're going to hire people. You have your faculty, you have staff, you have students that are all working on this. You are going to purchase products and services to support that research. So, you know, you can imagine this being microscopes and computers and animal cages and, you know, all kinds of different types of products, services, travel, hotels, all those things related to this research project. You are also maybe going to subcontract some of that work out to other universities who in turn purchase their own products and services to support that research, and so on and so forth down the line. IRIS takes all of that information, and we're able to quantify it all and produce metrics that can then feed all the way up the chain to the original recipients of those awards, and help them quantify the overall impact of the scientific research that was funded on, say, that single NSF award. And then you multiply this by all the members that we have and all the awards they receive, and you can really start building a picture of both the economic impact of scientific research as well as the human impact, the people who are being trained to conduct this research. And then what happens to those people? Where do they go? What do they do? How much do they earn? What kind of impact are they making on society when they carry that research trained knowledge with them out into the wider world? So some of the things that IRIS produces for our members are raw data sets. CSV files, database access, things like that, but also pre-built visualizations that can quickly convey information to whatever constituency they want to reach out to. So we build a variety of reports that focus on economic impact, that focus on employment impact, that focus on career outcomes, and we present the information in a variety of different visualizations to meet the needs of our members. And a lot of the time, our members are the ones who define what types of reports and visualizations they would like to see. We work very closely with them. University members from across the country sit on different boards here at IRIS to advise us on technical developments, to advise us on policies and outreach, and to, of course, drive the governance of the organization. So just a few little factoids about what we do, and in the last year, what we've achieved. And you can see here, lots of researchers use our data. We have a lot of data about our member universities. It represents, closing in on $100 billion in award spending. Where is that money going? How is it being utilized? What kind of impact is that making in the country? 720,000 roughly employees represent the research staff that works at all of these universities. This includes students, undergrads, grad students, postdocs, faculty, professional staff, things like that. All of that information is collated and managed here at IRIS. So what we all came here for is to sort of talk about the impact to the research enterprise here in the United States related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, I mean, we've all lived through this now for a year and a half. And so one of the things that IRIS wanted to do is try to quantify what that impact was to our member institutions. And so to do that, we asked many of our members to submit a special data set to us so we could begin building this series of metrics. And what I'm presenting here is what we built early on in the pandemic. So we've recently received updated data, so we'll be producing a more complete view of the total pandemic's impact right up to roughly April 2021. So this initial view that we see here is just the very beginning of the pandemic and how it really hit the research enterprise at our institutions. So you can see here in this graphic, the typical fluctuation in spending. So this would be the fluctuation in the purchasing of goods and services that support the research projects that we all work on. Typical fluctuation from June through March, and then you can start seeing the impact of the pandemic. So very direct data on how quickly spending contracted for the research that was taking place and how dramatically it contracted. Further data that we'll release a new report relatively soon that'll track all the way through the pandemic to 2021, and we'll see, a more broad picture of how this impact affected us. We break it down not just in total spending, but we like to look at federal and non-federal spending and how the impacts affected both of those, because it's not equal. The spending is different types of research, different types of funding sources. So the blue line on the top is the federal spending. And you can see the sharp decline taking place towards the end of this chart here, which really marks the beginning of the shutdown of our campuses across the country. So March, April, May 2020. Typically, the blue line represents federal spending. So this is funded awards from the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, other organizations, DoD, Department of Energy, so on and so forth. The red line represents non-federal funding. So this would be funding sources from, say, foundations, private businesses, non-governmental entities, things like that. And you can see a much sharper reduction in spending for the federal dollars, and then a reduction in the non-federal spending as well, but maybe not quite as sharp. And so, like I said, our future report will carry this out, and then we'll really see how things looked over the course of 1 year of the pandemic. The other figures that I have here for this sort of high-level overview are the impact to the people. So there was a reduction in overall spending. How did that affect the personnel, the staff, the faculty, the students that were working on this research projects across the country? And you can see in these charts, universities did their best to preserve the permanent and professional people that were working on their campuses. So this would be faculty, staff, postdocs, things like that. But the hardest hit were the students. And so they saw the most dramatic decline in employment during these early months of the pandemic. And so, you know, that was the biggest people-centric impact that we were able to quantify. And you can see, you know, again, our timelines are pretty limited. I'm only showing you the first couple months here of the pandemic, but the impacts are fairly dramatic. Now, before I go any further, before I hand this off to Matt to do a deeper dive into the impact of the pandemic, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'll hand this off to Dr. Van Esseltine. Matt, go ahead and take it away.
Sure, thanks. So like Kevin said, what I'm going to do is show some early findings, again, using these metrics data, but I call it sort of a deeper but narrower dive. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at a subset of awards that we can follow over time. This is for introductory purposes, a lot of you know, but just to reiterate, the scale of the disruption to the academic research enterprise is pretty total. Labs had to close. Here in the social sciences, fieldwork had to be stopped. Any in-person human subjects research, you know, we're affiliated with the Survey Research Center here. And so Survey Research Center is a place that's used to having thousands of people interviewing thousands of other people, both here and nation, maybe worldwide. And a lot of that had to be disrupted, changed, and altered. All of the ways that academics are usually disseminating information, conferences, seminars, workshops, meetings, these all got adjusted and rearranged. And more generally, people were disrupted in work time, employment, recruitment. So, right, there's a lot happening here. What we wanted to do for this analysis was to really drill down to say, okay, in addition to COVID hitting, a lot of other things are happening. You have new grants starting, you have old grants ending. So what I've done here is I've constructed a panel data set, meaning that this is following the same group of awards through 2019 and through 2020 to see what's happening. Actually, you can back up. Yeah, thanks. And so this brings together the U-Metrics awards and employee data and uses the information in these awards, which we get from universities, to find the federal records of these in NIH, which is the reporter, and NSF FastLane information. So that we can find out what these awards are, who the PIs are, and we can track everyone employed on these teams. So we can, again, these are awards that have active spending in 2019 and 2020. So following these, what do we find? And this is about 10,000 different awards across the 10 universities that Kevin mentioned. And we can see here, so this is just separated up by agency. So we're looking at the two biggest funders. It's about 50% of the research funding we're looking at in our awards is NIH, about 25% NSF. And you can see they're pretty similar across agencies. February and March, this is looking, you know, little changes in percentage, and then a 50 to 60 to 40% drop in vendor spending, right? So back at Kevin's graph of here's how the awards funding moves from university to subawards, paying vendors, paying employees. We're focusing here just on the main university primary award and its vendor spending. And we see just these immediate and huge cuts starting the month directly after. And drilling in a little bit, we were interested to see, is this something that seems to vary much across fields? And so we can look at the different sub-agencies of NIH and NSF and see what's going on. These are the 8 largest institutes and centers of the National Institutes of Health on the left, and then the 8 directorates of the National Science Foundation on the right. You can see biomedicine is pretty evenly across the board. What I'm showing here is the number you see is the median effect across these awards, and the bar is showing you the middle 50%. And it looks pretty much the same for NSF. The number that popped out there is, it looks like maybe geosciences had the least impact, which I don't know, I'm hypothesizing that's because geology is maybe the best science to be involved in during a pandemic. You're outside, you can socially distance, you interact a lot with rocks. But as you can see, even among them, a significant percentage having a drop in vendor spending. Now, one of the key things that happened right before most universities were experiencing a direct impact, in early March, the Office of Budget Management issued a memo which allowed federal research grants to continue paying salaries, continue paying faculty, staff, trainees, students, provided no-cost extensions, and some other forms of administrative flexibility. And one of the main aims of this was to try to preserve the academic workforce. So we see these huge cuts in vendor spending. On the next slide over, we take a look at those team sizes. So vendor spending took a huge immediate hit. Here we're looking at what's the average team size, meaning if you look at an award, how many employees at that university are being paid on that award. And while we see a clear change here, so the blue line there is 2019 in the same time period, February through June, and the red line is 2020, February through June. So there's a clear divergence here, especially in NIH, a little less clear in NSF. But the scale of the impact is much less. So we're talking about your typical NSF or NIH grant cutting something like 50% of its vendor spending, but over the course of the same time period, only losing on average less than a person's worth of their team. So the average in June here, the average team size of 6 in 2019 looks more like 5.3 in 2020. And so this suggests that the swift intervention from the Office of Budget Management helped prioritize how we're spending that, how we're responding to the pandemic by focusing on maintaining some workforce. So this is, again, this is just kind of a snapshot of some early emerging work. As Kevin mentioned, we have a big update on these data that can carry us basically a full year into the pandemic. So we're interested in seeing, this is the beginning of looking at how spending has been reduced, the extent to which grants are losing employees. As Kevin highlighted before, there's a difference there. The overall maintenance of a team size can mask that in some cases what we're seeing is the student population being reduced while staff and other team members are compensating for that. Follow-on questions are really about how this ripples out to the community. So the kinds of vendors that have lost university business, the types of employees being lost or not added, and as we go down the line, and here's particularly where Steppingblocks data will be really great in the coming years, will be how this ripples out then to people's additional employment as well and following their careers. So students who would normally have been involved in research, for example, this is an ongoing project we have with a team at Rutgers. Now those sort of typical student career tracks are getting disrupted, and we can follow how that proceeds through the community. That's Kevin told me to cut down my academic babbling as much as possible, and so thanks for listening to my steamroll, but I'm happy to go back and answer questions and everything like that. But I think Kevin you got more on how federal responses.
Yep. So if anybody has any questions for Matt, go ahead and speak up. Otherwise, we'll jump into the next section, the compensating for the impact of the pandemic. Okay. So IRIS plays a lot of roles. One of the roles is to support our member universities with metrics and reports and visualizations. One of our roles is to support researcher needs with data access, and a role that we're increasingly participating in is providing data to advocacy groups that are trying to remediate these problems, to breathe a new life into the research enterprise. So the next couple slides I have is just a demonstration of IRIS working with primarily government relations offices at member universities, non-member universities, organizations like AAU, and then feeding information to them to assist in crafting support for legislation that would improve the funding for the research endeavors. So this is an example where we were contacted to provide information to underline some Dear Colleague letters and outreach that Congressman Fred Upton was undertaking on behalf of research universities. We've also participated in providing data and information to support the RISE Act to increase federal funding for research universities, across the country, but our focus is research. And then we provide information on the overall impact to the nation as a whole. So it can be demonstrated that supporting scientific research across the country yields economic benefits to every congressional district in the nation, even if it doesn't have a research university located there. We also produce op-eds. The most recent one that was published in The Hill regarding NSF funding and advocating for that. And that one was recently published just a few days ago, 4 days ago. So the last thing I'm going to touch on is our relationship with Steppingblocks. So Steppingblocks and IRIS have been in a relationship for about a year now. Prior to that, IRIS was working exclusively with some federal agencies to handle a lot of our data. And so we look to expand our capabilities, both for researchers and to be able to provide more nuanced detail reporting and information back to our members. And we entered into our relationship with Steppingblocks, and we have started producing a whole variety of data points and metrics to support the research endeavors, the outreach, the government relations aspects of our university members. So this is just a couple examples here where we are able to track the impact that research trained employees. So again, this would be students working on research projects at a university. This would be professional staff. This would be faculty. What happens to these people when they take that training and knowledge and they enter the wider world? They leave their university and they go elsewhere. What happens to them? Where are they going? What places are they taking that knowledge? So we look at sort of the geographic migration of these people. Where are they settling and what are they doing when they get there? And then we also look at things like what industries are being most highly impacted by them and how much are they earning? What's their median earning? Who is earning the most, the least, things like that. And what organizations are they finding employment in? So these are just some examples here that I've put up on this slide. But thanks to our relationship with Steppingblocks, we are able to share that information with our member universities. And then we also aggregate some of this information together and we use it for public outreach and advocacy as well. So that's everything. That's the whole presentation. I would love to talk to people. So please, if anybody has any questions about anything, speak up.
While we're waiting on some questions to come through, Rob, if you could just give your perspective on what we've done with IRIS in terms of career outcomes and the things that we've learned in this partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Working with an institute of the caliber of IRIS is, we typically work with more individual universities, so it's been great for us, and also just seeing the impact that they can have, because their reach is so much greater than one university with the entire consortium, and the years that they have, whether it be legislation or all the other agencies that they work with. So it's been great for us, and we look forward to expanding that in the future. So it's been a fantastic experience.
Okay, well, Kevin and Matt, it doesn't look like we have any questions coming through. So for anyone who would like a copy of the recording as well as the presentation deck, we'll be sending that over in a few days. If you have any other questions, I added our contact information in the chat window, so feel free to reach out directly to any of us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So I do see a question.
Oh,
Terry.
looks like that just did come through. Okay, Kevin, if you see that one, did you want to give that one a shot?
Yeah, so Terry asks, please share more details about the loss of research activity by students. Contrast undergrads and/or graduate students. So Matt, do you want to field that a little bit? I think you've dug into that information more deeply than I have.
I have, but unfortunately I don't have that at my fingertips here. Terry adds, and adding other comments about the research pipeline in terms of training of non-faculty. So when it comes to undergrad and grad students, just for the first part, I think as I was looking back, that we were really seeing a much steeper decline in undergrad, which makes sense. If you think about it, all of these campuses closed, and at that point, I know actually I had a not federally funded, but I had a undergraduate student working on a research project here at IRIS with me during that year, and basically we kind of just closed up shop on it in March because he was going home, and it was just too hard to maintain that. And I know a lot of others had a similar experience. So I think there were a lot of undergraduate experiences that got a little truncated. In the case of graduate students, there's a more continuous kind of experience expected in most cases, where folks particularly are getting federal funding. So that's, yeah, Aaron.
We do have another question that came through the chat, whoever wants to answer. So how is the data tracked to job outcomes? Do the member institutions provide that information?
So member institutions provide information on the people that are participating in research. So the employees, so they provide us information on who these people are. And then we take that and working with Rob, match it up to the Steppingblocks data that they have access to. And then that's where we extract all the outcomes information. We also work with the Census Bureau and we do similar things with them. But the main source here is Steppingblocks. So in terms of data, this is just an additional tidbit. In terms of data that's provided by member institutions, what they provide is administrative data. So this would be the data that's used in the day-to-day operations of the university. So typically data that's just generated automatically anyway from their procurement services when purchases are made, from their human resources data that tracks who's working on what awards, things like that. Their award data, what awards are being received, what kind of dollar amounts, things like that. that's all generated typically in normal day-to-day operations. And then it gets packaged up and sent to IRIS. And at that point, we link it to a whole wide range of data sets from the public and private sector. And then we have a variety of algorithms and things that generate the metrics, generate the reports, and then we feed that back to our member institutions.
I don't see anything else coming through. Actually, something else just came through the chat. Let's see. Do you have some examples or use cases on how research institutions are using your data currently?
Yeah, so, and actually there's one right before that I see. So this was a follow-up question. The data that one gets via IRIS includes the linked data. So we provide data to our members in a couple different ways. One is we produce the reports and visualizations. These are designed to be easily digestible by just about any audience, and they tend to be higher level. They tend to aggregate data together. So in those types of tools, we don't feed back micro level data or anything like that. It tends to be aggregated, say, at the job type level. So we might aggregate all the faculty members at your institution together to generate some metrics related to them. But in addition to that, your institution as a member of IRIS can gain access through our virtual data environment to all the linked data that we have associated with your university. And then you can play with that. You can do whatever it is you see fit. And then if you want to take things out, then we have a disclosure process to do that, to protect people's privacy and things. But the mechanisms are in place for you to have that kind of access if you want it. Okay, Carlo, do you have some examples or use cases on how research institutions are using your data currently? So our data is used by a variety of different offices across campuses. And I'd be happy, Carlo, if you want, if you provide your email later on, or you reach out to me, I'd be happy to provide you specific use cases so you can see them firsthand. But here I'm just going to generalize them. So what we see a lot is, say, government relations offices. We have a variety of reports that are geared specifically to them. These are reports that they can pull data points out of, that they can use as talking points, but they can also, we've designed all these reports to be easily printable, to be handed out to congressional staffers. So we find ourselves getting requests very frequently from gov relations officers for this information, and then they turn around and use it for their advocacy and outreach purposes. We also provide template press releases. So every time IRIS releases a new, say, report, there is one that we produce that is sort of a general overview of the research enterprise on your campus. We provide these templates that can be quickly used by your communications offices to share that information publicly. We have a lot of examples of those from member institutions like Northwestern, University of Michigan, and others that utilize those types of services from us. We also have use cases for economic development and outreach by the universities to communities and businesses. So there's a variety. There's a tool that we use that allows you to explore the data and see the relationships between the companies that your university works with, what they're doing, the types of research they're participating in, and what kind of impact that makes. In fact, we call it the impact finder. And it's been used by universities to produce national advertising campaigns around some of the research that they do. And then a lot of what we put together can be utilized on your campus for reporting purposes. If you report impact, say, to your board of trustees or things like that, you can pull that data in. And again, we try to make everything as easily accessible and packaged as possible. And then if there's other things, we have a communications manager here who could probably inform you a lot better than I can about all the different use cases. Researchers on campuses as well utilize this data. Faculty, for econometrics, for sociology, things like that, to conduct their research. Oh, good, somebody included that. Thanks, Dan. So anyway, that's just a really quick overview for you, Carlo. If you want more information, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to provide it, or Dan Meisler, he just commented on here. He's our communications manager. He could provide that information to you.
And the website, the IRIS website, has lots of great examples, these visualizations, and also the member institutions too. So it's a great resource to get some real examples.
So
also a
we
question
have a question about patents. Do you want to take that, Matt?
Sure. The answer is yes. We link into and regularly refresh our connection to the database, the public database of the U.S. Patents and Trademark Office. So we have linked in the, yes, data on patents filed related to funded proposals. Yes, and we have that linked in the research data, at least at the employee level as well. So that's to say for researchers, which is very much my mindset, we can look in the U-metrics data and find employees, federal awards, and the patents that directly are filed by those employees and which awards those are associated with, which is cool and exciting.
All right, any other questions?
Just a quick note for anyone who's looking for the list of university membership. A question was asked in the Q&A. It is in the chat. So if you haven't checked out the chat, you can find a link to member universities there, as well as some use cases and contact information. So anything you need right now, just scroll through the chat before you head out. And looks like there's also some examples of reports and visualization. So thank you, Dan.
Yeah, we have a really good website.
All right, well, thanks everybody. That was fun.
Yep, thanks so much, Kevin, Matt, Rob. We'll be sending the recording and some of these other materials. I'll include some of these links in the email as well, because it looks like most people will find those interesting. And the slide deck will be in that communication as well. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
One last thing, Erin, I just want to say, if you want to see the refreshed COVID-19 impact report, now that we have a complete year of data, maybe you can follow us on Twitter, and then I'm sure Dan will be sharing that information as soon as it's available. All right, now I'm done, Erin. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much.
Appreciate it.